Invasion from alien species is underway, and it threatens the crucial network of relationships between plants and pollinators. These invasions can have a range of effects on native ecosystems, but are still poorly understood. Research by Dr. Fernanda Valdovinos and her team from the University of Michigan are helping to reveal the characteristics of species which are particularly successful invaders. Using a consumer resource model that incorporates population dynamics and adaptive foraging, the team can understand how successfully alien pollinators can invade a plant pollinator network. Pollinator species with different foraging traits were introduced to a variety of network models to explore the impact the alien invaders would have. In total, 31 factors were tested, and the team found that alien species with high foraging efficiency were the most successful invaders. During their research, the team also sought to understand which networks would be most impacted by successful invaders. They found that plant pollinator systems with a high overlap in diet between the native species and the invading species were particularly vulnerable. Native pollinators that were adaptive foragers were able to persist in lower abundances by reassigning their visits to plants that were not visited by the invader, while native pollinators without alternative resources went extinct. This research solidifies several observations made in the field and explains how and why these observational findings varied depending on the alien traits and network properties.
In plants. Did you know that there are an estimated 390,900 plant species known to science? This diversity of plant species is in part due to sexual reproduction. In plants, sexual reproduction is carried out in the flowers. The flowers contain the sexual organs. Let's start with labeling the different parts of a flower. The petals and the sepals help protect the flower bud and can be brightly colored or scented to attract pollinators. The stem and the receptacle are the parts that connect the flower to the rest of the plant. The stamen is the male part of the flower. It consists of the anther, where pollen is produced, and the filament, which is the stalk that supports the anther. These structures are responsible for the production and the positioning of pollen, the male gamete. The female part of the flower is called the carpel, and this consists of three parts: the stigma, a sticky landy for pollen, the style, where the pollen grain descends, and the ovary, where the female gametes or sextiles are located. Within the ovary, ovules produce female gametes. So how does pollination work? Pollination is a transfer of pollen from the male anther of one flower to the female stigma of another. Flowers can be pollinated in different ways, by wind and water, or by pollinators such as insects, birds, and other animals. Flowers pollinated by pollinators are structurally different from those pollinated by wind or water. Look at the differences in size, scent, and color of the petals, and the positioning of the stamen and style. Here are some key differences. Why do you think they are different? Did you know that pollinators are very important to our food supply? They pollinate plants that are responsible for bringing us 1 out of every 3 bites of food. Once a plant has been pollinated, fertilization can occur. Fertilization results in the production of seeds. A mature pollen grain containing 2 male sex cells has landed on the female stigma of the same species. The pollen grain grows a pollen tube that goes down the female style to the ovary, where it enters through an opening called the micropyle. The male sex cells travel from the pollen grain down to the pollen tube to the female ovule. Here, one male sex cell fuses with the female egg, fertilizing it. This develops into a seed. The other male sex cell attaches to 2 cells in the embryo sac, forming an endosperm. This provides the starchy food for the seed to grow. The ovary enlarges and becomes a fruit, surrounding the internal seeds. The fruit and seeds are dispersed in many ways, some even by humans, where they will again grow into a new plant under the correct conditions, completing the long cycle of sexual reproduction in plants. So there we have sexual reproduction in plants. Pollination has to happen before fertilization. The male pollen is produced in the anther, where it is then dispersed during pollination. The female parts of the flower are the stigma, style, and the ovary.
Let's talk about the different parts of the carpel and the stamen, and we'll see how to remember them as well. So in a previous video, we spoke about the 4 major parts of the flower, and we also saw what they do. We also saw unisexual and bisexual flowers. If you need more details on that, you can go back and check out our video on flowers, unisexual and bisexual. Okay. So over here, let's only focus on the reproductive parts, the carpel and the stamen. So let me get rid of these others. All right. So let's start with the stamen. What are the different parts of the stamen that we can identify? So stamen can have 2 major parts. So the part below over here, which is like kind of like a wire, we call that the filament. This is the filament. And that the part on top of that, kind of like the head of the stamen, we call that the anther. Anther. And guess what? Anther produces something called the pollen grains. You may have heard of this. Pollen grains. These dotted things that I've drawn over here that you may be able to see, they are what pollen grains are. Sometimes these pollen grains, some flowers have these pollen grains to be very sticky. In such cases, when you touch them, they will stick to your hand, right? And it's inside these pollen grains where you will find the sperm cells. So the sperm cells of the flower are found inside the pollen grains. All right, let's do the female parts now. The female reproductive part, the carpel or the pistil, they can be further divided into 3 major parts. So the topmost part is called the stigma. The part below, it's a long structure over here, it's called the style. And this structure over here is what we call the ovary. It's inside the ovaries you'll find these structures over here, which you can see, these seed-like structures. They're not seeds yet, but these seed-like structures, they are called ovules. And guess what? It's inside these ovules you will find the egg cells. All right, so again, let me just write that over here. The egg cells are found inside these ovules. So if you have more than 1 ovules, if a flower has more than 1 ovules, as you can see over here, each ovule will have an egg cell. And so you can kind of see now how far away the sperm cells are from the egg cells. For reproduction to happen, they have to fuse. And so one of the first steps of reproduction is the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther onto the stigma. And from there, the sperms will have to find a way to reach the sperm cells, the egg cells. But of course, that's going to happen in the future videos. This transfer is what we call the pollination, right? And we'll see in the future videos how bees and other insects play an important role in this pollination feature. Anyways, these are the important parts of the stamen and the carpel. Now comes the big question, how do we remember this? So to remember this, I want you to look at this picture. Trust me, this weird picture will help you, okay? So this middle part is the female reproductive part. Let's see how this helps me to remember. Bottom, I've drawn an egg. Egg reminds me of the ovary. That's like the easiest part for me to remember. So the egg is the ovary. On top of the egg, there is a tile. This is a tile. Tile rhymes with style. So this is how I remember style. Again, I knew the word style. I just had to remember where does style go, and this style helps me remember. And then on top of that, what is the symbol? This is the symbol of sigma. Sigma reminds me of stigma. Okay. So if I ever get confused, hey, which is stigma? Oh, this is the stigma. It's stigma. Okay, and you can see they're balancing on top of each other, and the stigma is about to fall. It's going to fall on the car. Car fall, car fell, carpel. That's that's carpel for me. So the whole thing is carpel. Okay. Let's come to the male part. What have I drawn? Why do I have drawn bulbs? Because I know there's a filament, and filament reminds me of the filament of the bulb, and that's how I remember, this is the filament. And what is it on the top of that filament? I see ants, but not just any ants. I see these beautiful female ants, ant her, anther, ant her. So again, I know anther, but then the moment I hear anther, if I remember this picture, I know, anthers are over here, the top part of the male reproductive part. And we know what these anthers are saying. The female ants are telling all the male ants, stay there, men, stay there, men. So stamen. And that's pretty much it. Now we remember both the male reproductive part and the female reproductive part. And at first you might be wondering, how do I remember this weird picture? Well, the thing is, weird things are actually easier to remember because that's how our memory works. Our brains tend to hold on to weird information. So take a look at this picture a little bit, and then you'll be able to do this. All right. So in fact, let me prove it to you. Now, I want you to pause the video, take a look at this picture, and see if you can name all the parts of this flower. Go ahead, give it a try. So could you do it? If you could, awesome. If you couldn't, no worries, you can go back and rewatch the video. The last thing I want you to do is to be able to memorize this picture, right? So what you can do now is take a look at this picture very nicely. Again, pause the video and then close your eyes and see if you can visualize this entire picture. Remember all the things, the egg, the ants, the sigma, the car fell part, and everything. All right? So once you're done with that, you'll be able to label all the parts.